Hi everyone, my name is Phil and welcome to Phil Does 3D. I'm a multimedia and 3D artist and I stream on Twitch weekdays from 5 PM Pacific time in the United States, 10 AM in Australia and 1 AM in the UK. I am working on an Art Deco building. We're going to do a cinematic fly-through using the Unreal Engine 4.16.1. We were working on our Art Deco building yesterday on the drain pipe here. So we're going to continue working on that today. So let's jump straight into that. I'm going to isolate that drain pipe we were working on. Pay no attention to the texture, that's the old default texture. We're going to be taking it into Substance Painter and retexturing it. Do remember guys, if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop into chat and ask me at any time. If you just want to pop in and say hello, that's always welcome. If you just want to watch, that's completely fine. Just excuse me for a sec guys. Okay. So the first thing I'm actually going to check is, I think we finished doing the UV mapping on this yesterday. I'm just going to open it up and make sure that it is all UV mapped, and yes, it looks good. The only thing I did want to check is this map seam. You see the seam that's running down the side here, indicated by that green line? That's not going to be good for us because that's going to mess up our texture. You're not going to get a continuous looking texture there. So the easiest way to fix that is going to be for me to put an edit poly down, go into sub-object mode here and select those drain pipes. And I'm going to rotate them around. Jump down to where my actual pivot is. Okay, let's get out of sub-object mode, throw down another unwrap just so I can check my UV seam there. And now the seam is at the back of the pipe and that's the bit that'll be up against the wall of the building. So that'll hide any of our texture problems we may have. Doing the rotation though has just thrown out my drain pipe placement here, so I'm going to have to just move a couple of them. Just so they're back in line again. And the reason that happened is when I did a rotation in sub-object mode, you see that the drain pipe is actually made up of 3 separate pieces and they all have their own axes, so doing a rotation on all 3 at once put them out of alignment. But it's easy enough for us to fix. Alright. Well, looks like I may be out of alignment here as well. Let's just double check that to make sure it looks okay. And I think we're good. Alright. Now the only other thing I do want to check is, you see it's also moved out of alignment here at the top, so I'm just going to move the top section over a bit. And that should be good. Okay. I'm just going to call this drain pipe and I'll explain what I'm going to be doing in just 2 seconds. So I'm going to get out of sub-object isolation mode, I should say. Now, you see on our building we have this drain pipe at the front, the one here in toward the middle, and we have 2 on the other side as well. One here and one here. All of the drain pipes are identical, apart from being just different lengths. What we're going to do to save polys is we're going to use one drain pipe for these 3, and also for half of this one, and we're only going to export this small section here. But before we do that, let's texture this one up and bring it into Unreal. So let's export our first drain pipe. And I'll make a new folder for it so it's easy for me to find later on. And again, I'm just saving as an FBX file because that's easiest to bring into the Unreal Engine. Let's jump into Substance Painter. And hopefully you guys can see the stream okay, because I know Twitch is having a few problems this morning. On their Twitch support page, people have been saying that their streams, they've been having problems with their streams. Mine seems to be okay. Everything still seems to be working. Let's create a new project and import that FBX drain pipe we just exported. Let's start by baking our textures out. And what it's doing is it's baking the normal map, the world position map, the ambient occlusion map, the curvature map, all that type of thing. And I do that because I use a generator inside of Substance Painter, and the generator requires these maps to function properly. Okay, now we do have that problem we've had in a few of our meshes where the normals are inverted. You can see that at the top here. Again, let's fix that up quickly. Just by throwing down a normal modifier, and I've done a flip on the normals, I'm going to do a unify. Export it one more time. Again, it's something you're not really going to know until you take it into another program like Unreal or Substance Painter, because in Max it looked correct. So it's not a big deal for us just to flip our normals though. Okay, let's re-import our model again, and the easiest way to do that, of course, in Substance is to edit project configuration and just reload the model. And now our normals are looking correct. I will zoom in to show you guys. So you see our normal map looks correct now. I don't have to rebake any of this. That should still be correct. I will do another bake though, just to be on the safe side, just in case the normal flip caused a problem. Okay. Now let's jump into our smart materials. If you guys remember, I created those air ducts that sit on the side of the building, and they're like a red metallic paint that's been chipped and weathered. I want these drain pipes to look the same color and have the same paint texture. So I created a smart material for those air ducts, and I think we'll reuse that same smart material. So if I jump into my smart materials, let's make them large so we can see them better. And you see that air intake smart material I created. I'm going to drag that into my layer stack. I'm going to remove the blank layer at the top. And again, it's a little difficult for us to see here, but let's see if we can get in and have a look. You see that our smart material has been applied to the drain pipe, and it keeps the same color as our air intake, so everything will look consistent. And it's rusted up and worn and all that type of thing, so. Okay. I'm going to rename my material so when I do an export on my textures I can find it easily. And we're going to call it drain pipe. And let's export our textures, and again I'm going to export it as a 2K texture, which is a large texture, but it's a large object in relation to the rest of the building, so I don't want the texture to pixelate, so I'm going to save it out large. Let's just choose our path. Models, Art Deco building, exports, drain pipes. And let's export our textures. Okay, let's jump back into Max. And now let's look at this second drain pipe. So I'm going to isolate that one. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select that second drain pipe bit here and detach it. Hey Crosswind, you do gotta love, well, you're exactly right. You do gotta love one-click texturing. It's only one-click texturing though in Substance because I did go to the trouble of actually making a generator in the past. But yeah, it saves a lot of time. These smart materials are a great idea. I'm really glad that Algorithmic made that function because it's really useful, smart materials. Particularly if you want to keep consistency between different objects but have them made of the same thing, like these drain pipes and those air intakes. But yeah, it's a smart material that's doing the texturing, so even though it looks, and it's easy to use, I still previously went in and actually created that smart material myself. So, but Substance does come with quite a few different smart materials built into the program you can use. You see there's one here for a yellow metallic paint as well. A lot of people use that on armor, I've noticed in sci-fi games. That just gets back to me, my beef with substances is everything starts to look the same after a while, because a lot of artists will use these built-in materials, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's not, like I said, not a fault on the artist's part, not a fault on the program's part. It's just a result of using these smart materials. Oh, you were trying to watch some intro videos on it last week, Crosswind? Cool. I know Algorithmic, their YouTube channel, they've got a lot of really great tutorials on Substance, Painter and Designer, I think is the other one. If you want to learn up on how the program works. A lot of the tutorials that Algorithmic do themselves are really great. It can be a complicated program. A Substance Designer is much more complicated than Painter. I don't generally play with Designer. I've looked at it, but not much. Yeah, they do. They have great documentation as well. And of course, they've got their forum, so anyone that uses the program, if you have any problems, you can always jump on their forum and ask the guys directly at Algorithmic for help. That certainly helps too. But yeah, I love Substance Painter. It's a great program. I'm using it, as you see. It saves a lot of time because of these smart materials and using physically based materials. The only issue I have with that is the fact that everybody's models start to look the same. Crosswind says, yeah, design looks incredible, and you've seen people make textures, you're not even sure how you choose it. It can be pretty complicated because Substance Designer is created so that you can make the actual substances that you use in Substance Painter, mainly. Or that you can bring directly into Unreal and do it on the fly that way. But yeah, hooking up all those nodes in Substance Designer can get pretty full on, for sure. Which is why, I mean, I don't use it. I don't use it because I don't use I don't use algorithmic software a huge amount. I generally, regulars to my channel know that I use Mari. That's my preferred paint program. And that's mainly because it can do really large textures. Substance Painter, I think, is limited to maybe up to 8K textures now. Don't quote me on that. It used to be 4K, it may be 8K now. But with Mari, I can go, there is no limit basically, I can go as big as I want. And I've worked on textures that are 65K in the past when I've done film work. And so that, you know, a program that can handle a texture that size is rare. Mari is one of the few that I know of that can paint in that large texture size on a model. But again, Substance Painter is a great program. It's used a lot in games, and it's used a lot because it's quick. It can really speed up your workflow for things like this. So, but I generally will prefer to use Mari, and I will be using Mari at some stage, probably for this project as well, because there's a couple of assets I still want to work on for the inside of the Art Deco building, like the floors and things that I may touch up in Mari. We'll see how we go. So we have this small side piece here, and that I've detached from the main piece. I'm just going to go into isolation mode one more time. And we're going to retexture this one as well. But before we do that, I'm actually going to, and I forgot to do this when I exported that first drain pipe, so I must remember to do it after I've worked on this one. I'm going to reset the pivot, and I'm also going to reset the X form as well. And while I'm here, I may as well do a normal flip because I know it's going to have a problem when I bring it into Substance Painter. Okay, let's collapse all. Let's work on these drain pipe pieces first, I think. So I'm going to select that first little drain pipe and throw down an unwrap. Open up my editor. And you see at the moment the size of the UV that it's using, it's really tiny, which is why the texture looks so crappy. But again, I did this back in 2011, so 6 years ago. Don't judge me, guys. We're fixing it up now. So let's select our UV shell and do a flatten mapping. We'll see what that gets us. Okay. That will probably work for us. I'm just going to see what it's doing here. All right. But I don't want these map seams like that. You see how it's broken it into 4 sections for the cylindrical part of the model. That's not good because we're gonna have problems with our texture going across that seam. So, and our normal map may show up that seam as well. It's one thing to be aware of with seams in your UVs. Anywhere there's a seam like that, which is that green line, a normal map sometimes can create real problems with that. You'll see the seams stick out. I was going to say something, but the seam will really be noticeable. So you've got to really watch seams with normal mapping. So we don't want this 4-seamed UV map. And I think the easiest way for us to fix that is probably going to be to start stitching them together. I'm just going to move one of these because I think one is over the top of the other. Yep. All right, let's go back and stitch that one. So now you see that our seam is actually, we've only got one seam now, and you can't unfortunately do anything about that. You're going to have at some stage at least one seam on your model, on your UV map. And we don't want it there because that's facing front, and again, that's going to be really noticeable on the ground. Hello, Lil Sahali, I think it is. Il Sahali, maybe? My apologies if I get your usernames wrong. You guys know I'm terrible with usernames. It's not your username, it's me. Yeah. So my apologies if I got your name wrong, but thanks for popping into chat and saying hi. Remember, if you've got any questions, guys, please feel free to ask me in chat. I've been working in 3D for more than 10 years, so if I can help you in any way, I'm quite happy to try. I don't know everything, but if I can help, I'll try anyway. So we have our map seam here, but it's facing forward, and that's not great. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to pull back here so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to throw down an edit poly, and that's just showing us our normal direction there. Oh, wrong one. I threw down an edit normal. we want an edit poly. There we go. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to rotate that around, but you see the problem I'm having where my my actual axis is way up here. I think that what the easiest thing to do here is going to be is I'm going to collapse my stack. I'm going to detach that sub-object there. We'll reattach it before we re-export it. So now that's a separate object. I can throw down an unwrap so I can see where my map seam is again. I'm also going to make sure that my pivot is actually in the middle of that object. I'm just going to rotate it around until that seam is hidden in the background there. And I can see it just there. So that's the bit that's going to be facing a wall. We're never going to see it. Alright. So hide the seam anywhere you're not going to actually see it, in this case against the wall. And that'll take care of any problems we may have with that seam. Okay, let's work on the next part of this model. I'm going to do the same thing to save time. I'm going to detach that tube. Again, I'm going to make sure my pivot is in the middle. And again, we'll throw down an unwrap. Yeah, hey Sniper Echo, good to see you. That's Sniper Echo's line, that's right. Everybody can say hello. I like it when all you guys say hello. If that's all you want to say, then that's cool. But it's good to see you, Sniper Echo. And yeah, Lil Sahali, I think that's your username. Thanks for popping in and saying hi too. Okay, we've detached our tube here. Let's do a flatten mapping on it. Again, we've got that problem with our seam, so let's fix that up. Let's stitch them together so that we can work with our model. And now we're back to just the one seam. Now, I'm doing it this way by stitching them together using a flatten map. You don't need to do it that way. In Max, you've got an option here in the UVW map where you can just do a cylindrical map, which will do this automatically for you. That's an option as well. If you don't feel like stitching your seams the way I am here, it's not a big deal here because it's only 4 seams. But that's an option to use as well. It's only for Max. I don't know if that's available in Blender or anything. Sniper Echo is asking me, Phil, is it okay to have 2 cylinders overlapping like that and not joined? Yes, it's okay. It's not ideal. Generally, to save the most polygons, if you make that 1 cylinder, would be better as far as polys go, but this cylinder isn't really high poly anyway. So having them overlapping, not a problem. If you want to do it that way, that's fine. If you really want to be super accurate and correct and the least amount of polygons, then try and make it 1 cylinder. So you'd make a cylinder and you put a bend on it to bend it out that way. But no, you won't have problems doing it this way. Let's again throw an edit. No, I don't want an edit poly. I want to do a rotation on this, and again we're going to rotate our seam around to the back so we can't see it. And now we're only left with the piece up here at the top to do. And all we need to do for this one, I don't need to move the pivot. Well, actually I will, because I may have to move it to line everything up correctly again. Again, we're just going to do an unwrap and do a flatten mapping on these pieces. Again, you see the original UV map, it was really tiny, which is why the texture map is really crappy. So let's do a flatten mapping. Alright, so now again these seams are not going to cause a problem for UV mapping because they're on the very edge of the boxes. If they were in the middle they'd cause a problem, but being on the edge it won't be noticeable. But what we have to do now is, because we want to export this as one piece of geometry and they're all separately UV mapped, and we've only got the 0 to 1 to work in, so we have to keep everything within that one square for all of our pieces. I'm going to start by scaling this down a bit. I'm going to move it outside of the UV space. I'm going to jump into the cylinder, open up my unwrap that we did before, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to select everything and just move it outside of the 0 to 1. And the same for the last cylinder. We'll open up our UVs and move everything out. Actually, I'll move it out down here. Now I put one up here, I put one over here, and I put one down here. I've done that because now what I need to do is collapse my stack. So I'm in Edit Poly. I'm going to start attaching these other pieces together now. Max does that automatically. It jumps out of sub-object mode when you are doing an attach like that. Let's just jump back. So now all of the pieces are reattached. I'm going to throw down another unwrap. And you see that it's kept where our UVs are, and that's why I moved them into separate positions, because I don't want any of them overlapping. It would make it hard for me to select them and move them if they were all overlapping each other, which is why I moved it out of the center there. So all we need to do now is position everything within the 0 to 1 here. So I know that these end pieces are never seen. I don't need them, so I'm going to make them really tiny and put them just in a corner of my UV map. Maybe just up there. Now for these cylindrical pieces, I'm just going to turn on edged faces for a minute. You see that our cylinders run that way, so most of our geometry is running vertically, which means that our UVs here I think really should be rotated, and I can check that by just selecting one part of them. Let's see one more. There we go. The same thing's going to be for this one. So we have to make sure we rotate this UV to match our actual geometry. So I'm just going to select that and rotate it around. Actually, I'm going to turn angle snap on here too so I can get a proper 90-degree rotation. Now this one I'm not rotating because the UVs are running in the correct direction, horizontally. This takes up the most of the cylinder's UV because it's the biggest part of the geometry, so I want to make sure that takes up most of my UV island in here. But I have to allow room for these others as well. So I am going to have to scale it down just a little bit. Now this one, I'm also going to have to scale to fit inside of my little 0 to 1 space there, inside of the square. And that leaves the top pieces which I can place in here. Well, again, making sure that none of these pieces overlap each other. I know a lot of you guys do 3D that know this already, but just for the benefit of anyone that's watching that doesn't do 3D and just likes to watch other people do it, wants a bit of an explanation as to what you shouldn't be doing, don't overlap any of these. Make sure they're all in individual places in your UV map here. So we're all UV mapped, we're all good. Did we do a flip on the normals on these? I can't remember. I don't know. We'll take it into our Substance Painter. We can find out then. But we need to reattach them all together. Actually, no, we reattached them, didn't we? We just need to change our pivot here to make sure it's in the middle. We will do a reset on the X form. And collapse our stack. And we're going to call this one, we'll call this one Drain Pipe Corner. I know it's not really a corner, but you know. It's our drain pipe, we can call it whatever we want. Let's export that as an FBX file. And jump back into Substance Painter. Let's just save our project here in case we want to come back and change anything on the first drain pipe. And we'll just call this one Drain Pipe. Let's create a new project. Load up that drain pipe corner we just exported. And I think our normals are looking okay this time. They're not inverted, so that should be fine. But the first thing I'm going to do is change the material name here to Drain Pipe Corner. Bake our textures out. So that's our normal map, curvature, all that sort of thing. Now again, you guys that know me know I hate these really harsh corners here. I hate a really sharp edge on anything. It really looks unnatural, except if you're doing game modeling. And even then, you should try and avoid it. Just the softer you make your corners, the more polys you're going to, the bigger the polygon count of the object. So the only time I would ever say it's okay is in a game model where you've got to try and reduce your polys as much as you can. You could get around. I could get around that by creating a high res mesh and baking out my normals that way. Yeah, and I could do that if you guys really wanted to see it. That's what I'd suggest you do. It's a better way to do it. Create a high poly version with soft corners. Bring that into Substance here and bake it out on. Bake that high res mesh normal onto your low res mesh here to soften up those corners. But again, I'm not going to worry about it because this drain pipe is way up at the top of the building, nowhere that the player is ever going to get anywhere near. So softening up those corners in this instance is probably not worth it because they're never going to see it. It's really more important on objects where the player can actually get close to the object to see it. Crosswind is asking any method to create curved corners without a high poly. You can, but you'd have to increase the poly a little bit on your low res mesh. So let's jump back into max just to show you what I mean. We have our low res mesh here, you know, really sharp corners. And you're asking me, is there a way to soften those corners without creating a high poly mesh? And there is. But what you'd have to do is you'd have to go in and select that edge and you'd have to chamfer it. I have a modifier here. It's actually built into the edit poly, but I prefer to use the modifier. And I'd go to 3 segments and use that that will soften that edge up for you. Let me just pull that around. That's the only other way to do it. You'd have to do that just on the edges here at the front that you can see. And by doing it that way, you don't have to create a high poly for everything. You just soften up those edges you need. Crosswind saying, well, more along the lines of the texture. No. 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 Not really, no. Crosswind says, is there a way you could curve the corners by painting in the normal map? Oh, you can do it that way. That's an option. It has to be done through the normal map. You can paint your normal map in to soften the corners, say in Photoshop or something like that. That's generally going to be more work than doing it this way. If you wanted to, yeah, it's usually more work painting in a normal map than it is to actually do the geometry in a 3D in a 3D program and get your normal that way. But you certainly can do that. It's just more fiddly and will take longer than doing it this way. So yes, no, by all means, you can paint your normals in Photoshop in a third-party paint program if you wanted to. But I would suggest doing it actually on the geometry. It'll be easier for you in the long run. Okay, so we have our normals baked out here for this map, for this mesh. Oh, you didn't know if there was another workflow you could do in Substance or Quixel or something? Yeah, I don't know of a way in Substance Painter to do that. It may be possible, but personally, yeah, I don't know. I don't know of a way to do that in Substance Painter. Because Substance Painter generally does all that mixing on your normal map for you automatically. You don't really paint in your normal in Substance Painter. You could do it certainly in Photoshop. Crosswind says you recently got back to a car model that you were working on. You need to do a high poly dashboard for a bake. And now you remember how much of a pain hard surface can be. It certainly can. I'm a hard surface modeler. That's what I do. I work in ArchBiz now. But even when I worked in games development, I was an environment artist, and most of that work involves creating hard surface models. So I never did character work or stuff like that, but character work can be a real pain too if you've got to get your edge loops correct around eyes and the nose and cheekbones and all that sort of thing. That's a real art in itself as well. But yeah, no, I've always been hard surface. But yeah, no, not in Substance Painter that I'm aware of, Crosswind, I'm afraid. You'd have to do it in the mesh. You're saying you were hoping you could bake the edges in without a ton of control loops. Yeah, I know. You can do it in Photoshop. It would be a nightmare though. The best way is to really do it using your control loops, your edge loops in 3D, creating a high poly mesh that way. Now, do remember though, guys, there is a program called it's probably not going to work for what you want. I was going to say there's a program called Instant Meshes, which is an open source free program you can download. That can create some edge loops for you automatically, but it generally works more from a really high polygon mesh to make it a bit lower. I don't know if you can go the other way. You may be able to. It may be worth looking at that program to see if you can import your low-res mesh of your dashboard and see if that program can create at least the base edge loops for you in a higher poly version. It's like a retopology, basically. So if you don't want to go in there and do it all by hand, try to retopologize the model either. I know ZBrush can do retopology. The Instant Meshes does it as well, but I don't know if it works from a low poly mesh or not. That would be the other way I would suggest trying it if you want to. The easiest way to probably do it. You're still going to have to go in and adjust some of the control loops by hand, but it'll get you at least 50% of the way there. But yeah, do check out this program. It's called Instant Meshes. If you search Instant Meshes on Google, it'll come up. It was created by some guys at some university. I think in England, in the UK. I could be wrong, but it is open source. It's completely free. Download it and try it. It's a great program. I use it all the time because I do a lot of photogrammetry work, which makes really high resolution models. And I have to bring, if I have to reduce the poly count on my model, I use Instant Meshes to retopologize it. Either this program or ZBrush. ZBrush does retopology too, and does it really well. But this, yep, give it a go. Instant Meshes. And that may save you a lot of time doing a retopology on, instead of doing it all by hand, if you want to make a higher res mesh.